So when you look at disease, the three diseases that are most likely to kill people in the Irish population, chronic diseases are number one, vascular. Okay, that's heart attack, stroke. Number two, cancer, and number three, dementia. Okay, they kill about 80% of the Irish population. Now, if you look at those in isolation, you might think they're very different things. Well, my brain is, I can't really, I've got Alzheimer's, I've got, tau proteins in my red, or I've got, atherosclerotic plaques in my coronary arteries, or, whatever it is that's going on, for example, or you have a tumor somewhere. The point is that the combination of environment and genetics are what determine whether you're going to get disease earlier in life or than you should. Okay, genetics is a bell curve. So you take a group or a population of people, a bell curve of people. You're going to have outliers, and then you have the large mass in the middle. The outliers is the poor unfortunate soul that no matter what they do in life, they're going to get disease early. They need special intervention.
So, welcome to this episode of the Dare to Be Different podcast. Today, I'm joined by an old friend of mine and a very inspirational man, in my judgment, Dr. Emmet Byrne, who I've known for 26 years. Emmet was a professional rugby player in Ireland. He played for Leinster. He also played for Ireland. He then decided that at the end of his career, at the age of 34, he wanted to study medicine. He fulfilled his dream of becoming a medical doctor, and fast forward to this point in his life, he has just set up the first mental health clinic in Ireland, and he has a real passion for men's holistic health. Emmet, I'm so looking forward to this conversation. One, because I know you from the past. Two, because you've had a massive transformation, which is what I love. And three, because you're moving into this area of men's holistic health that is close to my heart. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's great to be here, actually. Yeah, when you first contacted me and told me about this, I was really excited about it. So I like that introduction too. What you don't say is that I've spread it all out over about 20 odd years. I think we can do anything we want to do. I really firmly believe that. I didn't understand it maybe when I started the journey, but I quite understand it now in terms of our thoughts are our most powerful things. So when you put those to action and you focus a little bit, not to give myself any kind of I have the only virtue I'd say I have as a virtue is I'm a bit stubborn. Far beyond that, I don't like to give in too easily. But beyond that, yeah. So I think anybody can do anything they want. But it's great to be here. Great.
Well, going back to when you retired and when you decided to do medicine, I thought, what the fuck are you doing? And here you are. You've done it. You've put the work in, and you're moving towards a really meaningful mission in the world. So well done.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I'm really interested. We can dip in and out of your life and your influences and childhood whenever that feels right. But I want to get into the juice. I'm interested in your transformation from a really dedicated, well-trained professional rugby player and where you are now to a man who, in my judgment, based on what you've told me, is a little bit more spiritual, a little bit more open-minded, and a little bit more moving towards a greater mission in the world. Let's start at the beginning of that. Tell me how your rugby career was for you. How were you at the time of playing rugby, and why did you choose to retire at 34?
Okay, so well, my rugby started in school, obviously, and I had no real, I wasn't particularly gifted at sport in terms of coordination or speed or anything like that. I was reasonably strong for my weight, that kind of thing. I was strong for my, I was a strong kid, but I wasn't particularly great at anything related to sport. And I was looking for a purpose in life, which I didn't even know I was looking for a purpose in life. I wanted to attach myself to something. I wasn't particularly academic. I've got 2 degrees now. I did engineering when I left school and then medicine. But that's again, it's down to intent. It's not that it's down to, goal orientation intent. It's not down to, oh, I'm intelligent or academic or anything like that. But my thinking when I was a lot younger in school and stuff wasn't anything along. I mean, anyone went to school with me and said, like, say, X amount of years later, I'd have 2 degrees, would have laughed. They would have fallen off a chair and laughed. So back then I was just looking, finding my way, probably a little bit like most guys transitioning into teenage years and stuff. And then I started playing rugby. I liked the physicality of rugby. I liked the bumping and the contact and stuff like this, and just enjoyed it. And then something clicked in me when I was about 14 or 15. And this was me, and I would argue it straight up. I'd say I was quite lazy as a trainer. Wasn't interested in getting out of bed early and doing the yards and stuff. I was getting up before school to go for runs and to do training and learn how to get stronger and train and stuff. That got me interested in strength and conditioning and fitness and conditioning before I even knew what it was. I was just interested in learning about it, but it wasn't fun. And it wasn't wholly evolved at that point in terms of, the environment where I was living and the culture I was in. So I was just doing what I thought was right, which could have been completely wrong. But I was getting up and I was putting in the yards. And that effort translated into obviously a higher level of fitness. And I started kind of getting better at the game of rugby. And this gave me a purpose and a reward and a purpose and a reward. I started chasing these things harder because instinctively you think, well, I'm going to try and I'm going to keep, and it gave me a channel to work with, a map, if you like.
And did you become dedicated because at a young age you were getting some feedback that maybe you're good at this?
Yeah, but not. I never actually had a whole lot of self-confidence really in the sense of I never walked into a room and thought I was the best guy at anything, to be quite honest. I felt, as I'm older now, I feel that we all have, abilities in certain ways. I mean, you understand, you can break things down better. But back then, I was probably even a little bit insecure about things, and that kind of could have been a driver of it. So you get that little bit of reward, and then you feel, okay, that feels nice. Let's have another go. So I think that was more the driver for me rather than, say, for example, an understanding of the growth or the developments. It was more an insecurity driving it, to be quite honest. And it's hard to. The thing is, where did that fundamentally come from? And I think really like my hero in life is my dad, right? My dad's a very honorable man in many ways, but for some reason he was that old school Irish type of, you wouldn't give you a lot of encouragement and a lot of praise. And maybe I was chasing that. I think so. I think that could have been it. And I was doing it in some respects for that. So that was the starting point, and that evolved then and transitioned into me just obviously getting more competitive within rugby and then setting goals like at a higher level, like representative level and so on. And schools rugby, as you know, in Ireland is quite a high standard. So it drives into to a fairly high level, but it's still an amateur game at the time. This is the late 80s, early 90s. So at the time, I had to do my studies as well, which I wasn't particularly good at, despite what people may look at now and say, oh, whatever. So, but in fairness to my mother, she was the more sensible. She kept driving me to keep that side of things going. So I kept a little bit going at that side as well. And I think deep down realized that that was important as well. How did it, again, you have gut feelings and gut senses about certain things. I always listen to my gut. That's the one thing, if I had a piece of advice to anybody, is listen to your gut feeling. I said to you earlier on today, we're born with internal guidance systems, in my view. I believe that's how we can differentiate without any instruction as to what is fundamentally right and wrong in the world. Now, everybody has variance in this, but the point is that I don't intellectualize big decisions. I feel them. I try to feel them. And with respect that it hasn't let me down thus far, in my opinion. So from that perspective, I was, my parents were obviously influential in my life. They were good people. They were, I think, moral good people in a sense. They're hardworking people, and they set a good They set a good example. My sister was the same. I have one sister, older sister, and I literally like. The one thing I'll give, they set a good example, but they never tried to influence my decisions, which I felt was really good as well. Now you could argue that they didn't, a lot of people had their parents that I knew not so much making the decisions for them, but they were coaching them in a much more way, like coaching them through, you should do this course and then leave us, or after the leave us, or did that. And my parents just left everything out. And that gave me the ability then just to kind of explore in my own head. Now, that can be a good and a bad thing. You're trying to figure out, you can be floating around for a while trying to figure it out. Rugby kind of gave me that stability to a degree. And that's kind of why I attached myself to it quite a lot. I like physicality. I love sport. And the rest was I willing to apply myself to it and do the best I can. And I made that decision early in life. And then you can't pick yourself a rugby team. So there's a bit of luck in this in terms of where it's going to go. I asked myself the question when I was younger, I'm going to put the kitchen sink into this. What if I technically, quote unquote, fail? I don't believe in failure now, we would describe the word, but what happens if I don't make it? Like, reach the promised land of, professional rugby as it evolved into, or international rugby. And those questions were had to be asked, because you could break down if you put your whole life and soul into something and then it doesn't work out for you.
Especially in the early days of professionalism when you played as well.
Yeah,
It would have been tough to make that decision.
it was, and like, I was quite tunnel vision though. I didn't think of consequences a whole lot, except the only thing I could think of was, okay, if I don't ever play for Ireland, or I don't, fulfill what my goal is and my vision is, so to speak. And then I got peace with that, and that's really when things started to shift.
Mm.
Was because I knew I was doing my best, and then once you know you're doing your best, then it's kind of, now, to try to tie a spirit, I wasn't particularly spiritual in my thinking then, but I was unusual, I think, by relative to my other peers, just from the point of view of religion and spirituality at that stage. I always went to mass. Okay, now that sounds like a very strange statement to make, and I can't tell you why. Okay, I wasn't going in there, and I never read the Bible. I didn't go in and go, oh yeah, like a. But for some reason, I had this draw just to go. But I couldn't fundamentally attach myself to something that based itself on fear and guilt.
Yeah.
That's what it was at the time in Ireland, in Catholic Ireland. And again, that good feeling told me fear and guilt is not the way, is not the pathway. It's not the pathway, because it doesn't align. It just didn't feel right. So I always kept my toe in the water, though, if you know what I mean, but never fully bought into it. So if someone put a gun to my head and said, "Oh, is there something there? Do you believe in a greater energy or power or God or whatever way you see it?" I wouldn't have been able to honestly give an honest answer there, but I couldn't be sure. So I kept my toe in the water as such. Okay, so from that perspective, it did ground me. It kept me from going completely mad or wild or following your strongest urges in many ways. But it didn't give me fundamental answers. So at the time, then it was just, okay, you'll follow this rugby pathway, and let's just see what happens. Academically, things just kind of rolled in. I did the engineering. I got a professional contract at that point, and getting a professional contract in the early days in rugby wasn't was quite a strange thing. So you're playing a game that you were doing at an amateur level. You're playing it because you enjoy it. Next minute, you're getting a check for it. But it was relatively low money. Okay. So, but you're still at the time when you're 20, 21, 22. Next minute, you're getting a check. And suddenly I had money. Okay. So, it was kind of a funny moment. And we didn't realize, I mean, you're signing this thing with it almost like you've won the lottery, not thinking of unintended consequences down the line, because I'll talk about them later in a sec. But you're signing this dotted line, thinking all my Christmases have come at once, and you're doing what you absolutely dream of, and you get paid for it. That numbs you from, I suppose, who you are to some degree. I'll explain that in a sec.
Mm-hmm.
So, personal growth is I think, is about experience of things, enjoyment of things, engaging in things, but at the same time understanding where you are at certain times. I didn't really understand where I was in my life as a person. I was making decisions that I think went fundamentally against who I am as a person. You know, those types of decisions young people make, silly stuff, and hurting people. You know what I mean? I don't mean intentionally going out with a malicious, malevolent type of intent of, or manipulative type of thing, but making decisions that were selfish to gain my own thing without even realizing what it was doing. When I look back at it, then I don't judge it, but I look back at it and say, wow, okay, I wouldn't do that now. There's loads of things to hell that I did back then.
Sure.
So, but the rugby was numbing me. It was such an intense, like, you know the way I was as a trainer and as
Intent.
yeah, I lived it, and I used to annoy people because I talk about it, and I tell them, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that because of my own insecurities, the other way, and I used to drive people mad, and I must have been so annoying and hard to be around at the time. I was thinking about it, but but that was my way of dealing with it, and I kind of I kind of nurtured that side of me, and it was like a very sledgehammer approach to life in many ways. But the purpose of playing the game kept me content. I wouldn't say happy, because I mean, what is happiness essentially? But I was definitely content. So anyway, you're moving through the ranks. You're getting exposure. You're learning the game. The game evolved a lot in the first 5 years, and that's where it came from. It was fundamentally amateur, even though we were getting paid in its practice. We had to turn up at certain times and wear certain clothes and this sort of thing. but our actual understanding of the game and understanding of game analysis and, even strength and conditioning and stuff, this stuff was very much in its infancy. Over time, that evolved and responsibility got higher. The team improved. So we started having some level of success. By that, I mean, we started beating teams that historically we would have been beaten by. And suddenly the confidence within the Irish group started going up, and Irish rugby went up, obviously, with professionalism as it is. And you've the ups and downs of getting picked, getting dropped, getting injured, and all these different things that you deal with. But again, you're still living in that little bit of bubble. So, like, I like to say to people, like, in that period of time, rugby delays your midlife crisis by 10 years because it, like, literally, it takes out that kind of, our
As you
profession.
said, again, I like that. Rugby delays the midlife crisis by 10 years.
Yeah, well, if you play a decade of rugby, it's, yeah. So it's,
You don't have to feel, you don't have to stop.
you don't.
Do.
Yeah. And you're living in a world, like, I mean, you touched off of very macho world of guys where your thinking is influenced by the group as opposed to an individual kind of line of thought. So it's very hard to think entirely on your own.
For yourself.
Most heavily, yeah. So it depends if you're a conformist type personality or you're a little bit of an outlier. But certainly, I thought differently, I think, to a lot of people. But I certainly conformed at certain times, and sometimes wasn't always proud of that, to be quite honest. Because
Probably why we connected.
yeah. It was interesting that, yeah, because it felt good. That just felt right, the kind of way. It wasn't something that you kind of meet people and you just get on with them, and other people are you're awkward around. It's not that you don't like them, but you're just not as relaxed or whatever it is. And I think I never felt that with you. I think even when we didn't have to hang out, we were hanging out and chatting about different things. I think it was the curiosity of what was going on.
Yeah.
It started off with strength and conditioning, which is obviously your specialty at the time. And then now it's evolved into what I would say much deeper stuff, like, which is probably why we're here, to be honest. But from that anyway, I never let go. I always had a touch of that kind of, I suppose, spirituality kind of threaded in within this, but it was never at the forefront of these things. And
What you were developing and a fascination for the body and health, weren't you? Even when you play, can you talk about
that, yeah, so that's how I ended up doing medicine. Okay, so I was interested in strength and conditioning at a young age because I felt that I'll tell you what the main reason was. Probably was I was quite a light guy for a prop. I played prop, and I was always trying to get stronger and always trying to get bigger.
Yeah.
So it was a struggle for me to put on the weight I needed to be at a test level prop. I remember when in '95, so I would have been about 21, 22 at the time, and South Africa were playing against the Barbarians in Lansdowne Road. And I was walking into the Berkeley Court Hotel behind the South African team, and Osterrad was in front of me. And Osterrad was a year older than me. So he'd been 23, 22, 23. You should have seen the size of this guy. And I was just going like, I'm never gonna be like, and then like this sort of stuff. I was kind of, when you're that age, that affects you, whereas you're much more, you're more into that. I suppose your EQ flies up when you get a bit more experience. But the thing is, I'm looking at this and going, how am I going to compete with that in my head? It influences. But the point is that was obviously much later. Earlier on, I was trying to put on weight. I was learning about training as best I could, and I learned the hard way. I used to do weight sessions after I played games, like silly stuff, like incredible. Like the thought of it now just baffles me. But point is that I always thought more was better, more was a better approach, and it's not, as we know now. It's been intelligent with obviously hard work. But so the point is, and you have to individualize it down as well because everybody's different because we understand that. But on that journey of learning about the strength and conditioning, I started to learn about the body. So performance is bodily related, physiology, nutritional biochemistry, all those different things have an effect on performance. And I started getting really interested in that. It wasn't wholly evolved when I started playing professional rugby. So I took a personal interest in it and started, just reading everything I could. I was doing even when I got a week off, I'd do a course. I'd go off and do this at the CSCS, Certified Strength and Conditioning course, a specialist course. That's with the NSCA. I did the Russian kettlebell challenge for a week away.
Remember that?
Pavel Tsatsleger and I. So like it was all like I just started like I had an interest. That was like a holiday for me. I'd be meeting these guys. One I didn't get to do was one you did. I think did you meet Louis Simmons? Did you go over?
I did.
Do yeah. So I would have.
And
I
Charles
would have been
Francis.
yeah. And oh, you met Charlie. That's right. You stayed with Charlie. Yeah. So like that. they're kind of at the forefront of their own type of field. And though that I was really interested in that instinctive, that's the sort of thing people pick up a novel. I'd pick up a book on I have the Russian weightlifting library in my thing. Now, that's directly translated from Russian to English. So you have to read it about 5 times before you get any sort of handle on it. But the point is, I enjoyed it. Okay. And when you enjoy something, it starts to absorb, it goes in much easier. And and then something clicked. Again, I can't put exact time space on this, but it was really, I felt that medicine came into the space. And that, again, it kind of, if you look at stress.
When did you first have the seed thought, I would like to be a doctor?
Early 20s.
Wow.
Yeah.
You never told me that. I didn't know.
Yeah. So early, but it was a fleeting thought. It wasn't something that, first of all, remember, I wasn't that academic. Medicine is seen as the elite of academia. Now, going into medicine, I'll just slight detour. Having gone in as as a much older student, you observe things, okay? And I realized that people who say the most intelligent people do medicine, and I'm not going to entirely disagree, but I'll push back a little bit on it and say the most focused people do medicine. So it's a focused intent. I would argue 90% of people in medicine are very intently focused on what they want to do, and they achieve that because they're focused. And I'd say 10%, they look at something once and they have it. They're very bright people. Okay. They're the rare, they're not that common. So we over kind of emphasize this thing about intelligence in medicine. I think that if everybody in medicine was exceptionally bright, they wouldn't have to work that hard. The essence of being exceptionally bright is that things come so easy to you that you don't have to work. Because most medics work really, really hard. And there are exceptions, but they're rare where you get the odd person. So I believe any or most people with, an intent can do medicine. So anyway, I didn't notice at the time, of course. I didn't, I feel like, this was almost like guided. I was guided this way. But the point is, I had a fleeting thought of it, and I thought, that's never going to happen. It's one of those things. So then as the years went on in mid-20s, now, you get a lot of exposure to doctors when you're doing medicine. So I thought it was Walter Mitty type thinking. I'd asked him, I talked to, Professor Arthur Tanner, Jim McShane, and I talked to, any of these guys that I would be, have downtime in an airport, or you're in a hotel and you're waiting for the match or whatever. I'd say, yeah, so what was medicine like? And I'd ask them, and then I'd say, what do you think could you go back and do it? And to be fair to these guys, they were always really positive, and it was very, it was all, they were always encouraged. They were passionate about their jobs. So they always said, and then you talk to somebody outside and you might just let it slip and they'd say, you're mad, it takes too long. And I'm kind of going, okay, that's fair enough, whatever. So you have a kind of a split in time and that sort of thing. I realistically at that stage didn't think I would do it. What I'd say even someone like Jim, I'd say, look, would it be worth going back? I said, wait till you finish your playing career, because you have a short enough time doing that, and then we'll examine that, we'll look at that, whatever. And I said, oh, fine. So even towards the end of playing rugby, I didn't think I was going to do it from a realistic point of view, take 5 years out, off salary, at the age of 34, go through an internship and then go through specialist training. I mean, that's a fair old thing to take on. But then I had this, again, I don't want to be, saying to dictate whether I had a vocation or not. But the difference for me, what a vocation versus a desire is, a vocation, you have to do it. A desire is you like to do it. So I felt I had to have a go. That was the whole logic. And I'm a man of fate, so I decided I'll roll the dice once. So I applied to one place. If it happens, I'll get in, and that's meant to be. And if I don't, I'll be doing something else. And that's what happened. And within 6 months, because I wasn't certain I'd get in, but within 6 months of application, whenever I'd been accepted, and the rest is history. I was in my first lecture, and away we went. So it happened quite fast, really. In the end, turns out I was working in the media as well at the time, so I had a little bit of a job while I was doing it. So that kind of fell in the feet as well. So that was kind of nice, doing rugby analysis, and then it really kicked off from there, and it was just it was so unforced, really. At the end of the day, there was a good bit of the thinking was over a long period of time. I planted a seed in my gut, and that seed evolved, and then that's the way I make decisions now. I plant something that I think you could have 1,000 ideas in your head, You plant one of them or you plant them and then see if they grow. And if they don't grow, then it's not meant to be.
Yeah.
If it evolves, then you go after it.
But what about retirement from rugby? 34, retired from rugby. What was your mindset then? Had you had enough? Were you grateful? Were you disappointed? Have you fulfilled your ambitions? How was your mindset then?
Yeah, that's a good question. Towards the end, my mind couldn't, I think you subconsciously are looking ahead. I think the brain is working ahead of where you are in the present, even though the most important time, as we know, is now. Okay. But it's very hard. Maybe it's the wrong way to think about things. Maybe it's wrong to look ahead. But I was the kind of, I suppose, a fickle nature of professional rugby to say. The first thing about professional rugby you have to say is, even to this day, but lesser so, is that you don't have escape velocity financially when you finish the game. If I was a professional,
Especially when you played.
yeah, particularly when we played. I mean, the first generation, decade, their 12-year player, we didn't have that. So you had to get a job. You were not going to survive, as in, earn a living or live off, what you earned as a rugby player. That's patently obvious, quite, so to combine that, when I was over the age of 30, 31, my body started to struggle with the recovery between the week to week games. Okay. So the games are high velocity. Now, people say, what retires from rugby? I was as fit and as strong in my 30s as I was in my 20s, but I couldn't recover from the high velocity collisions. So what was happening there was that you would play a game, and when you would have been, say, a Saturday, you'd be ready to go on a Monday for a hard session. It was taken to the Tuesday and Wednesday. Then you started picking up niggles, and then my body started to feel it, started to shake. So that bulletproofness you have in your mid to late 20s or even early 20s was going. It was shaking. The reality of my body starting, that your ability to recover was going down. Now, I think the exponential damage done playing rugby, the damage done playing rugby to your body over into your late, say after the age of around 32 is exponential. So, I mean, I think you can get away with it up to your 20s, but the ability to get away with it in your 30s is just not the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's stuff you can carry into later life. You need to be mindful of that. Now, I was subconsciously aware of this, but it wasn't making the decision for me. What was doing it for me was the kind of fear. I was led by fear, which I think we all are to a degree, and to some degree, work. That's one thing I'm really in my lifetime would like to conquer, because I think that's something that is the ultimate thing to give you pieces when you lose that. And then fear is a big driver of the ego, and it fuels the ego a lot, and then it drives us to do certain things. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good, but like rugby would be, I'd consider a good endeavor, but the problem is, what's your purpose, what's your reason for doing it, what's your drive? And you can find all sorts of dark reasons behind that, like, and in anyone who achieves things, you'll find, if you dig in, you might find that.
Oh, for sure. So you even said earlier that in your childhood, the drive to train harder was being driven by insecurity.
Oh, it was for sure.
For sure, I guess.
It was being it's like we all want to be seen. We all want to be recognized. We all want to be the people that people are, in a positive sense, of course, talking about, or even negative. You want to be relevant, and that was what the first thing I felt. It could have been music, it could have been anything, and then it's quite often, if it fails, then you see yourself as a failure, and then life doesn't, bring the meaning that. So if you're like, I think knowing yourself is very important. So setting expectations can be here, and your achievements can be here. If there's that gap there, then people, like, if you think of life in general, the way we've evolved, right? So from a pure, physiological point of view, and socioeconomic point of view, up to very recently, now human beings have been around for, give or take, 200,000 years. Up to very recently, we have our basis on a day-to-day basis, from when you get up to go to bed, is survival. Okay. Now, in the modern Western world where we live in, we're lucky to be born into this environment, because not everybody's this lucky. But the point is that survival is a given. Let's be honest. It's not hard to survive in this environment. So then your purpose becomes what you dictate it is. And if that purpose is not, if those expectations of what you set your purpose, and remember, it's complicated by measuring yourself, your dick measuring yourself against every other guy.
Which is a massive problem with men.
Massive. And you're seen as a failure. You're the average of the 5 people you hang around with the most. So you're hanging around with guys and they're doing very, very well. You come in at the average, you're not going to be, you want to be relevant within that group of people. And to do that, sometimes that can lift you up. But being lifting yourself up in a perceptive sense does not bring contentment and happiness. I've realized that. So even though you might be earning more money, or you might have a very big badge, like you might be the brain surgeon, or you might be the best rugby player in Ireland, or whatever it is, the happiness doesn't necessarily, how would I say, automatically come in at that. You can cloud things over with success and distraction, but it doesn't fundamentally sort the problem out. And I discovered that when I first got capped for Ireland, it was one of the most amazing things. I mean, you were there. It was one of the most amazing. In fact, you told me, I knew I was we were in the gym in Riverview. I don't forget this. And actually, we were training, and so it was just me and you. And then you kind of said, well, you're in for this week. And I was kind of going, and I was on a high straight away. I was just bang, but
don't tell Gats. I shouldn't tell it.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah. Because you were about to say it, but I remember that to this day. But that was 23 years ago. Yeah. So anyway, the point is, I mean, that was quite a. But again, that's dopamine and all the other things coming to your body and making you feel great, and also the content and peace of knowing that I'm not going to go through my life and trapped. Not that was, I'd have gotten over that. But the point is, and some people don't, by the way. I know people who set their life on it, and they still are to this day upset about not being capped for whatever reason. But the point is that that was a great sense of, obviously euphoric kind of sense of being and so on. And I'm going to play for Ireland now. I mean, unless something dramatic happens. But I wasn't fully content then. I'd hit that level. I mean, obviously I'd played I'm on the pitch as such, and went on. You're again distracted for a period of time, and then you get time to sit back. And I still wasn't wholly fulfilled. Now, I was never a mood down guy. I was never depressed. I didn't feel I'd failed or anything like that. But I just didn't feel it wasn't what I thought the promised land was. That kind of way. I'm here now. It's all great.
Yeah.
So then the next goal was, let's fast forward medicine. I get to the end of medicine. I'm going to be happy when I'm a doctor. And same thing. Didn't really, the circle wasn't complete. So it got me asking further questions. Now, this is where I started the kind of the spiritual kind of journey, and there's a few aspects to this. So
I'm glad you're going there, because I was just going to say, what happened along the journey for you to deepen into this?
Yeah. So I mentioned about religion, always having a little bit of an attachment to it. Now, this is funny because guys used to know I'd go to mass, right? These are my mates, my peers, and none of them would go. And they'd be calling me the biggest hypocrite because I'd be living whatever life I want to live, selfishly going through my own agendas, and yet going, it's like the mafia guy going to the church, so to speak, I don't think it was that bad, but the point is that there was a contradiction within my thinking. Then okay, no doubt about that, but I didn't fundamentally believe that it was wrong to have sex before marriage, or to and not that I was even doing a whole lot of that. It's just the point is that there were certain aspects of what we're taught that I felt were wrong. But I think you have to respect that space as well. I mean, you have to look at all the things that, the church just frames them in such a way. But the point is that I felt there was man-made infiltration into what was generally a good message. So, but I still hadn't got the answer. So a few things happened, right? The first thing was I'd achieved certain goals that were relatively, perceptually, again, difficult. I won't say they were absolutely difficult, because I do believe a lot of more people can do what they want to do when they focus their mind, but they're not easy things to do. You have to apply yourself. You have to be disciplined. You have to have a certain amount of staying power, resilience, grit, whatever you want to call it. You get through it. I don't think it's a unique talent that gets through these things, but there's a certain application, right? So you get through that. You feel like you've done something. You have this sense of I've achieved something. But then when you get there, you're looking for the next one. That means there's not that full, settled kind of contentment. I mean, there's something that's missing, because you keep, well, what's next? What's next? What's next? So when you have those questions, you have to go, well, why? Like, I mean, you start asking the so where is the answer? What is the answer? So then other things happen. So you reflect. I used to read a hell of a lot. I don't read as much now because you're busy with family and work stuff. But I mean, I used to read a lot about it. So I engaged my thinking into looking into books that would talk about this sort of thing. And you get, again, broad.
What topics?
spiritual. Well, I mean, the things that I'll be reading about will be everything from history related to, I suppose what triggers things like world wars, why these things happen. And again, it's to do with, human nature, conflict, to do with tribalism, all these different things. Obviously poverty, and I was interested in what was driving human beings in a sense. And I'd pick up everything from Hitler's willing executioners, which is how, say, for example, um, the concept of looking at someone like the Nazi part or something like the Nazi Party sort of rise to power when the Weimar Republic collapses, and how like the damage that was done, or the ideology that proliferated, that did all the damage, or a lot of the damage, was facilitated by people that had no idea what they were even doing, because they were supporting. They were literally conditioned to believe a concept through things like propaganda and stuff, and understanding how human beings can fall into that trap so easily without thinking on an individual level. But this is, again, these things all are just, small chunks of, you start learning about human nature a bit more. But from the point of view of the, I suppose, the from the medical side, was that, again, you'd be in Temple Street A&E. I just remember this case: a 3-year-old boy comes in with an inoperable brain tumor. Now you're thinking to yourself, you have a high idea about yourself when you've done a little bit of learning, when you know a little bit more than someone else, and you start to thinking, like, again, you get a sense of you can do things. And then you get hit with something like this and you kind of can't. But more deeper than that, I wasn't thinking about so much I had a moment of just thinking, just a very brief moment of the actual child, the parents of the child, this sort of thing, and you're thinking, like, why are they going through that? What is the purpose? Why is life so unfair? This sort of thing. And then you can extend that out to anything nowadays, like what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in
So that's touched you. You were touched by something.
It did, yeah. The helplessness of it, the nothing you can do of it, that's life kind of side of it. That's fate. That's it. And you're kind of thinking, surely it has to be more than that. So I had to find an answer to this, but I couldn't look at. I have to know how things work,
Yeah.
which is probably a fault of mine. But I like to know what's behind the curtain, right? So spirituality didn't really resonate with me till I came across. I was flipping around, and I was actually buying a book on Amazon, and this suggestion for a book called The Way of Mastery came up, and it just it was a it was it's a trilogy. It's 3 books that are, like, say, for example, now again, has to be interpreted with a bit of a leap, because I don't fundamentally know or understand or can say fundamentally if it's true or not, but
Yeah.
I believe it. Is that The Way of Mastery was a trilogy that was written off somebody who was channeling Jeshua Joseph Ben Joseph, who's Jesus Christ, if you like.
Uh-huh.
So this is, and I'm not religious. I don't want to be going down this road. I'm not converted. I think everyone's the same. I think everyone is universally connected. This is my belief. But it was interesting in that the teaching of that was that Jesus Christ existed, but didn't come as God. He came as human being, and he said we're all God, but the message was distorted to put him on a pedestal and to worship him. And he said that's wrong. This is the book of The Way of Mastery. There's a science behind spirituality. So there's a vibrational, electromagnetic push-pull science at a subatomic level that we fundamentally don't understand, and everything is connected. Okay, so it's obviously waveforms dictate everything. The vibrational kind of, I suppose, the frequency and the amplitude of waveforms, then they vary, and they create everything. And everything comes from our thoughts. So it's a combination of the thoughts of all the humans and the consciousness that creates everything around us. It's understanding that made sense. It kind of it resonated with me, pardon the pun, but it just did. And then I was kind of reading it going, this makes sense. Okay. So then I got to the end of that and I felt, okay, well, there is a purpose, and and the sufferings, again, from my understanding, my interpretation of this, is a decision made by us or ourselves. We've got complete freedom to make any decision we want, even though we may feel we're suppressed. So if I was in jail, I still have complete freedom. I don't have to feel like I'm suffering. I can choose to be happy. You have complete freedom. So the freedom of choice is that we're living the lives we want to live right now based off our own choices, and we have to learn what the truth is. That's, again, my understanding of this. So when people are suffering, they've made that choice, and you can choose otherwise. But sometimes and again, it goes into, there's a reincarnation element to this where you stay on this cycle until you figure the problem out, until you figure out what the truth is. And we have all different experiences. So I could have been that 3-year-old child a lifetime ago. I could have been whatever, So I'm in a different thing. I'm a little bit more, if you want to interpret from the book side of things, a tiny bit more awake. I'm aware, and I have a fundamental belief that there's something there. So if you said to me 5 years ago, I said, "Is she in a car?" Going to my head, is there something there? I would have been skeptical, but I couldn't say for certain no. Now I'm almost convinced, I'm pretty certain there is something. I just can't fully explain it. But I'm interested in that kind of, for want of a better word, enlightenment journey. So that's kind of where I am at the moment. And it seems to answer or fill the voids in what I'm trying to. Yeah, sorry, you're going to say something.
No.
Yes.
I'm just gonna
Yeah.
come to a point and then go into the next point here. So, all right. So you had you fulfill your dream to play for Ireland. There's been a seed planted when you're playing rugby towards becoming a doctor. You're fascinated with the body during your rugby career.
Yeah.
You've finished. You've decided to study medicine. You've seen some suffering. We were talking about this earlier. You've seen some suffering within the medicine journey. It's touched something in you. Probably a place of pain and frustration, I guess, for a while. And
yeah,
it's deepened you, right? It's obviously you've said that your powerful logical mind has been on a journey of discovery, but initially it was a felt sense in the body, right? That's drove it.
It has, but there's an interesting thing that the body and the brain do. And the antithesis to enlightenment is the ego, right? So eventually our own self-centered ways kick back in. And it's the idea of training. So I felt that for a window. And then you fall back into the world of, I have to qualify, I have to make sure, because I was in my training then, and it's quite, busy, and it's how you perceive things, but it was stressful at the time, and you're going through this thing, and it's all about you, this sort of thing. And I lost sight of that for that period of time. So it's interesting you say that how do you cultivate that kind of sensitivity, I suppose, to the world, and but in a happy way. Like, I mean, the good news is with all this is that the basis of things seem to be love, and universal loving intelligence. So from that perspective, it's good news for anybody like who feels bad or is worried or whatever. Like, the end stage seems to be a good thing. We just have to figure it out. We have to go on that journey. So so we have windows. So materialism and egoic things, which I love. I mean, I like all those things. I mean, as much as anybody else. It's about, for me, it's about basically moving away from that if we can, and if we have, but that takes a certain amount of desire. It's not hard in the way we perceive hard, but it's a decision, and that's the key. Make your decision, understand, and that's what I believe.
So you're a man. You've been raised as a man in a certain environment.
Yeah.
And now at this stage in your life, as an adult, you're on this quest, and I know you've been on it for a while to help the men of Ireland and the world. You've got a fascination in holistic men's health, physical, mental, spiritual.
Well, can I kick in there just for a sec? Yeah. So when I went through medical training, and I don't want to sound like I'm having a go at medicine, I'm very grateful for my opportunity to medicine, and it's an unbelievable, I think, career to have. And I think, and I've worked with people that I think are far more virtuous than I am. So I don't want to take that but when I went through medical training, because of my exposure to training, nutrition, exercise and stuff, I couldn't accept that you could leave that stuff out when you're going through your medical training, which unfortunately, medicine.
What stuff specifically?
Well, we're talking about the medical system is based off a disease risk model.
Yeah.
Okay. So what that means is there's two components to health. There's your disease risk, which is what the current medical model focuses on. So it focuses deeply on detection of pathology and intervention and management of pathology when the problem is there. Functional health is your strength, your fitness, your sexual health, the ability to perform in the bedroom, and the ability for the brain to retain, process, and recall information. That's quality of life. So the quality of life maintenance is kind of left very much secondary to what Not because people don't understand and want to do it, it's because the way doctors are not trained. They were trained to detect pathology and manage it and fix it physically if you're a surgeon and so on, or an interventionist. So the thing is, I couldn't get away from, like, I liked all the interesting bits about pathology and pharmacology and therapeutics and all those different things, but I couldn't get away from the fact that it's, we need to emphasize this stuff as well. This is going through my head. And again, instinctively, I I know that everything's connected. Like, quite often in medicine, you have compartmentalization of different areas of the body, and I think they are fundamentally connected. So when you look at disease, the three diseases that are most likely to kill people in the Irish population, chronic diseases, are number one, vascular. Okay, that's heart attack, stroke. Number two, cancer, and number three, dementia. Okay, they kill about 80% of the Irish population. Now, if you look at those in isolation, you might think they're very different things. Well, my brain is, I can't really, I've got Alzheimer's, I've got, tau proteins in my red, or I've got, atherosclerotic plaques in my coronary arteries, or, whatever it is that's going on, for example, or you have a tumor somewhere. The point is that the combination of environment and genetics are what determine whether you're going to get disease earlier in life or than you should. Okay, uh, genetics is a bell curve. So you take a group or a population of people, a bell curve of people. You're going to have outliers, and then you have the large mass in the middle. The outliers is the poor unfortunate soul that no matter what they do in life, they're going to get disease early. They need special intervention. The special science is going to sort those boys and girls out. Okay. The other end of the outliers is the 95-year-old guy smoking 40 Woodbine and drinking 2 bottles of whiskey, all right? And they're bulletproof, okay? But they're rare populations. The general of the middle. So what they do environmentally has a big impact on whether they go into disease and keep their function, lose their function or stay out of it, okay? So from that perspective, um, the essence of the origin of these three diseases that I'm just using as an example, because they're the common ones that kill people, is the same. Okay. But yet, medically, we quite often isolate these. Okay. So you're not going back to root causes. So most things, when you look at the first intervention from, say, for example, again, and I don't want the people to think that I'm having to go with the system. The current system is designed, let's say general practitioners are in many cases my heroes in life. They work so hard and they're very stoic. So I just want to make that statement. But the medical system of itself, within the disease risk model, focusing on that, it will measure risk factors for disease. So you go into your GP once a year and they're going to measure blood pressure, cholesterol, insulin resistance risk, and so on and so forth. Okay. They're the kind of three canaries in the mind that you're looking at that will indicate whether you're at higher risk for getting, they're not definitively saying you have a disease, but they're higher risk. So you could go into your GP every year and you could be fine. And then one year you go in, your BP, your blood pressure's. So you've just waited for that problem to happen, and next minute you're being interviewed, you're getting medications. Okay. So what is the most important thing that I go to the GP every year, or is it what I'm doing every day between those two contact points? And of course, we know the answer. The biggest effect in that, if you take the large population group I mentioned, the single most important thing in their whole life to do to manage their health is their day-to-day habits and how they apply themselves, things that I can't or the doctor can't do for them. Okay. The doctors then fill in the gaps. Okay. So if you have a genetic predisposition to high cholesterol, then we'll step into that space. If you have, and then the benefit of taking a medication over the risk of getting atherosclerotic plaques or, arterial disease is beneficial to take the medications, then we might look at that and then do it and so on and so forth. And that does work to a point. Remember, medications, if you take a quality of life curve, okay, the quality of life dips, your physical peak at 25, you start noticing it around maybe late 30s, late 30s, 40s. You have an accelerated downturn of that over the age of 65 if you don't do certain things like exercise and eat well, so on and so forth. Okay. Medications bring you down the bottom and extend along the bottom. Okay. So it does keep people alive, but it's not affecting that quality of life.
Yeah.
Now, this goes back to what you're saying, the holistic approach. To square that curve, you have to have the holistic approach. There's no other way around it. We haven't figured out another way around this. Now, human beings are heterotrophic, okay? Plants are autotrophs. Heterotrophic means that for 200,000 years, we had to move to acquire food and move to avoid being food, okay? So now, all of a sudden, it's like slamming on the brakes. have 200,000 years, and then bang, you're stopping literally maybe 50 or 40 years even. Probably 40 years, because that's when it changed. It changed with Nixon in 72. The food supply was poisoned by processed foods. It became very cheap and very addictive. Okay. They blamed problems on fat. When I was 10, you remember this, everything went low fat. So that was the 7-country study. A guy called Ansel Keys. They had originally 22 countries. It didn't correlate, so they dropped 15 and kept 7. It was funded by the sugar. This was madness what went on. But basically,
And the Kellogg guy too, right?
I mean, the whole thing was geared towards industry. Okay, they funded corn industry. There was a development of a thing called were able to convert corn into a thing called high fructose corn syrup, which is the exact molecule that's in sugar cane. It was developed in Japan in '66, and it was used in '72 to make food cheap. So they infiltrated the subsidized corn, high fructose corn syrup, then infiltrated everything. Now you might say, well, how do you know? That's a conspiracy theory. You just walk into a supermarket now. You've got fruits and vegetables, a little bit of salads, meat counter, fish counter. The whole center of the thing is processed.
Yeah.
So our food supply has been infiltrated. So the problem is now is, because of industry, and again, business and industry have good points as well. I'm not bagging them. But unfortunately, the unintended consequences, maybe, because I don't think that they intend to do this, has driven chronic disease through the roof with 2 major things: the food supply poisoning, and we're more sedentary than ever. Now, remember, we right up to very, very recently, for hundreds of thousands of years, we had to move to survive. All our health, heart health, bone health, vascular health, our skin health, our hair health, extrapolated down from movement. And then suddenly we're doing it. Again, I didn't fundamentally understand these things before I went into medicine, but I knew it was important. Now I understand exactly, down to a cellular level, why this stuff is. And you can't attain and maintain good health without moving.
Yeah.
You just can't do it. So this is not emphasized enough. It's starting to infiltrate medicine now because the burden on doctors and hospitals is so big that they have to do it. Okay. I mean, the burden, everything will outrun its time. I mean, when you look at again, I was listening to a guy, Robert Lustig is a pediatric neuroendocrinologist in San Francisco University. He's brilliant on sugar with kids because he knows it's addictive and dangerous. And he just basically, because now remember, in America, there's some kids having liver transplants at 15 because they're drinking these gallon buckets. It's on another level.
Yeah. Yes.
So he's dealing with really big problems based on just sugar alone. Okay. And he was talking about, say, for example, he talks about how the industry has just essentially the business. You meet these people at an individual level that run these companies, and he said they're actually okay people, but the industry within and of itself, he says, we'll change, we'll do whatever it has to do, but we don't want to lose money. So the money, unfortunately, drives the agenda in these situations. And he talks about this at length, and he goes into the science behind it and how it affects and how it addicts, how it causes brain addiction and stuff like this. But the fundamental issue is that it's been allowed to happen, and that there's no counter information or counter push against it. So it's come in now, and it's again, we're battling these issues, and people don't fundamentally know what to do. Now, the thing is, even if this didn't happen, i.e., there wasn't an infiltration of the food supply, or there wasn't, suddenly everything became automated and we're not have to work or do manual labor, whatever it is. I think that, movement is is intrinsic. It's part of us. It's again, we have to be doing it. If you look at the energy balance pathway of the body, okay, so this is a different way of looking at it. In that, what would you think? I'll ask you a question. So you're in McDonald's, you're passing by. You never go to McDonald's, Craig, but you're passing by and you see a 25-stone man with 2 Big Macs in front of him. Are you judging that man?
Instinctively, yeah, I am, because of the way I've been raised. But then I can catch it pretty quickly and understand that he's, if I'd have lived the life that he'd lived from the time I was born to that moment, I'd probably do the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, it's true. I used to judge like that. And then I started to learn about it. The biochemistry of a human being dictates their behavior. Okay. So when you have been conditioned, and who's to know, he could have been, brought up at let's say, as this particular individual, whatever they are, at a very young age eating the wrong stuff,
Of course.
didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
You damage your energy balance pathway when you do that. Okay, so you spike insulin. Insulin goes up. So I don't, for people who maybe don't understand, when we eat something, particularly carbohydrates, but processed carbohydrates, which are refined sugars, they go into the body and they trigger a sharp release of insulin peptide hormone, basically a hormone from the pancreas, and that is a storage hormone. I mean, the objective is to drive nutrients into cells. Okay, so that's a storage hormone. So you're storing things, and that's going to add on weight and other things, but it has overload cells and has knock-on effects that do damage, right? So essentially, when we eat something in a normal, healthy person, what actually happens is you push macronutrients, fats and carbohydrates and proteins into cells, and it goes into fat cells as well. This is normal. This is healthy. The fat cell releases a chemical called leptin that goes up to a part of the brain called the ventral medial hypothalamus, and that tells the brain, I have stored energy, so I can afford to now spend energy. It's a safety mechanism for times when we were not living in a world of an abundant energy supply. So the body could conserve calories, so you didn't basically die of starvation as such. Okay, so that switched on a part of the brain called non-exercise, a basic part of the brain that triggered a thing called non-exercise activity thermogenesis. I don't know if you heard of that. And that switches on the sympathetic nervous system, which is your movement, and switches off the vagal nerve stimulation of the pancreas, which shuts down your insulin, which means you stop storing. So you have this needle which is going into storage and into burning, storage, burning. So you've suddenly now tipped it into the burning stage. You're active, and you are now you've stopped storing, you've stopped putting fats and things into cells. So what happens is, if you block that leptin signal, the brain doesn't know it stored things. It doesn't switch off the storage, and it doesn't switch on your activity center. So you get two things that we don't like: laziness and gluttony. Okay,
Yeah.
we don't want to move, and we don't, because we want to conserve the calories. And the gluttony is because our brain is just telling us, you have to store energy, keep doing it. Now, historically, there's many different things that there are different things that block that signal. In children, they can get a tumor there, and they put on lots of weight. You remove the tumor, and then you basically, they do fine. Now, if you clear the receptors and they don't, you have to use a special drug called octreotide, which is another complicated thing I won't talk about now. But when common reason that, and this is a hypothesis, it's not absolutely proven, but I'm confident enough it's true. The main reason people don't see in those situations that biochemistry dictating the behaviors of that particular individual is because in a high insulin environment, it blocks the leptin signal.
Mm-hmm.
And our insulin, when it's up, blocks it. And there's a reason for that, because if that energy balance pathway worked too efficiently, we wouldn't have been able to put on weight at key times in our evolution that would have meant we wouldn't survive pregnancy and puberty. And that's why. So it's a complicated thing, but the spanner in the whole works is coming from the modern lifestyle that we're living, that we're not designed to live. And we all know this, of course. But point is that this stuff is not being aggressively taken on in the medical side of things. We're firefighting. So going back to Lustig, in the end, I'm going to give you the numbers. Okay, so this is 10 years old, but it'll give you an idea. And this is how industry even outlives itself. Okay, so what happens is that the healthcare system in the US is approximately, again, 10 years ago, 2.6 trillion expenditure. Okay, 75% of that, and this holds true in Ireland as well. So we have a 20 billion plus expenditure. About 75% of that is on chronic disease. So it's the biggest loading, those diseases I mentioned, right? And 75% of that 75% is technically preventable. That's an astonishing thing. So you take the numbers in America, you're talking about 1.4-ish trillion is prevent. The profits at the time for the processed food industry, which is the biggest driver, it's bigger than sedentary living, smoking, and alcohol put together in terms of driving the diseases. That's Asim Malhotra. That's an English cardiologist that was talking about that. Now, it might be slightly different in England, but the point is, we know it's very, very obviously big. But so 1.4, so 75% is pretend. So the profits from the processed food industry in America was something around the region of 800 billion. So profits were being outstripped by the damage it was doing essentially in the medical care system. So you're paying 1.4 to get trillion to manage that's possibly preventable, that you're paying into to save people and stop them getting sick, or not even stop them getting sick, but keeping them alive essentially. and you're only making a profit. So even the likes of the big banks we're looking at, this isn't a model that's going to work going forward, you know. So processed food industry is under a bit more pressure in the US because of the damage it's doing and the knock-on effect.
Right.
So the Medicaid and Medicare, which is your socialist kind of social support structure in America for healthcare, is under threat now because of the burden of chronic disease. So if we don't take the holistic approach, we are going to burn out current medical system. It is not going to survive. And it's simple. And I make that statement clearly. It's true.
And let's relate that to men now. What are you seeing in your practice? What are the common ailments? Where is it getting worse for men, and how can you support that?
Okay. So the biggest thing I see, okay, guys are a bit more, and I say a bit more, I don't mean that in that I want to give them credit. I think they're a lot more clued in, okay? There is definitely a shift in generations for one, say, for example, my father to me, to the next generation of young men are coming through. I think that the problems when guys are dealing with metabolic issues, let's talk about that, because that's to do with diabetes, heart disease, obesity, etc. You know, the stuff kind of we're touching on. They'd be lifestyle based diseases a lot of the time, small bit of genetics, but would be manifested earlier in life by their habits earlier in life. So when I see a guy at 40, 45 and he's overweight and he's maybe struggling with things like a sex drive and, you know, so on and so forth, like we're relating this back to hormones a bit, but the point is that it didn't happen more often than not. So I'm not going to say it couldn't, but it didn't happen more often unless there was a crisis later in life. So in other words, usually it's habits that are developed in their kind of, I suppose, formal years when they're growing up, their household years, or anything from, you know, when they're born to maybe when they're teenagers and so on. Okay. Now, some guys who develop poor health later in life usually have had some form of a crisis. Okay. They've had a separation. They've had a bad health. Like they might have gotten unlucky and just got a cancer scare. You know, they got something and it knocked them down and their health deteriorated and they never fully, and they got into a negative spiral. Okay. That's generally more recoverable because the brain is, you know, it's less conditioned towards the situation. You know, some people it's a personality emotional issue. Okay. So people who are never took an interest in their health just haven't got an interest in their health and then start running into problems that's affecting their lifestyle or their life they want to live, then start kind of trying to make that shift back into, and then they come in and they say, what can I do? And of course you can straighten it, but the problem is that if I had, and there's a Nobel Prize in this for anyone who could figure it out, the key is not understanding what we should be eating, the exercise we should be doing, you know, the management of stress, the sleep, and all the things that we know keep us well. It's the behavioral change. So if we can get, now I deal with people that are motivated because they're coming into change. So that's a biased group.
Yeah.
I'm sitting at home. I'm sad. I want to change my life. I want to get fit. I want to feel better. I want to be able to have sex with my wife, whatever it is. And they come into me, and you know, that's a very strong starting point. The highest resistant population are the people who maybe are unemployed. They're sitting at home. They're addicted to different things. It can be anything from YouTube to alcohol to food and so on. Now, if you can come up with a solution to the people who need it the most, which are those people, the key is the behavioral change. And the more I go into it, the more, and that again, that's another thing that's a little bit more spiritual than your average, because you have to dig deeper to kind of combat the way the brain perceives the world through addiction and other things like that. We're totally underestimate that. Like I ask people just to say, give up bread, and they find it so hard. They're addicted to bread. And because we're addicted to so many things that we don't even realize. Now, not all of these things, some of them are pleasurable and enjoyable. I'm not saying to move to a cave and just sit and meditate for your life, but it's important that you understand key principles that you do on a day-to-day basis without being perfect that will fundamentally serve you and your body well. Because I've never really seen doctors manage a lot of stuff, as I said, but I've never seen a doctor, and to my knowledge, read about a doctor who's cured heart disease. I actually haven't. I've never seen, you can see some guys there to some degree with lifestyle, but it's not the doctor who does, the patient does that can reverse diabetes. They can do that to a point, yeah. But point is that we can only direct. I can't make the patient do it. It's the body that does it. It's the you create the environment that the body will find its equilibrium and its peace, and its homeostasis as such. So that from that point of view. So from a men's perspective, I think the challenges start earlier in life in general. Okay, so it's recognizing that quite often we don't recognize it until it manifests itself in our day-to-day living. In other words, it interrupts our peace in our daily life. And you can hide behind that as well with food and things like. So if you're a type 2 diabetic and you're depressed and your medication is, pizzas and ice cream, you can hide behind that to a point. And then the first point of contact will be when you're in an ambulance going to hospital. That's when you're going to be in the doctor. So it presents in different ways. Some people are just sick of it and they go, what am I doing wrong? Now, there's more information than ever out in the world, but it's threaded with misinformation because people want to make money for the most part. There is good information out there, but being able to, again, extrapolate what's right and wrong can be quite hard. The key is to simplify it and, again, to feel what's right. So when you're eating something, I can really tell when it's good for me or not I know this is, but there's a few safe rules I work with in relation to that, into those principles with guys. Again, now you're talking about men when they come in, then how many of them actually change when you give them the information. Okay, so you've a rule of thirds here. You've got a third that will just pull it off. You've got a third that will do some of it, not an awful lot of it, or some they won't do, and then you've got a third you literally have to hold their hand. I've gotten good at, and I don't say I'm good at anything, but I've gotten pretty good at reading the personalities that fall into these brackets. Now, oversimplifying the rule of thirds. When you get a nose for that, you need to be able to put the thing together because there's a chain of events that have to happen. The number one is the guy has to come in. Okay, so the man walks in. So he has identified something that within himself he's not either happy with or he wants to improve. Okay, so that's the first thing. And as I said, most of that starts earlier in life. Okay, so that's my interpretation of it. Okay, and then if it's severe, that's later in life. It's generally due to a big speed bump in their life. Something's happened. So then you get this, and you go, okay. So you combine the science with the art, if you like, and you get a feel for the personality, the motivation, the desire. Did someone else send them in? Did they come in at their own bat? Are they motivated? Are they people who need to be pushed or pulled, if you know what I mean? As in pulled, slow, pushed away, but sorry, held back, as in take it easy. You're going to do, you're going to overdo it or overthink it. Or do you need to actually drag them into the space and stuff like this, or in something in between? So you identify the personality. Everyone I get gets a lifestyle plan, so the guys, and then it's really after I give them that lifestyle plan, which is a 6-point plan based off methods around. So when you think of, there's 4 criteria. Do you want me to go through these?
Yeah.
So things you've heard of, but then you break them down. So you have nutrition. So for cellular health, okay, you don't want to overload the cell. So you control nutrition with the type of food, the volume in the meal, the frequency of eating, the timing of eating. Okay. Timing of eating is the fasting kind of concept, which is very important because we digest best between 7 and 3 in the 7 morning, 3 in the afternoon. After 7 in the evening, we start to break down our own internal tissues to create energy for the nighttime fast. So if you eat on top of that, you're kind of overloading the stuff. So eat light in the evening. And we knew this. Breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper is hundreds of years old, but we know why now. Okay, so that's nutrition, exercise, aerobic conditioning. So this is all to do with cellular health. This is just words. So aerobic fitness, by definition, means when you are using energy in a cell, when a muscle cell is working, doing its work, it's converting the glucose into a thing called pyruvate, which is in the anaerobic substrate. And then the pyruvate goes into a thing called the mitochondria, and it's converted to a thing called ATP. So that's your metabolism. When you do exercise, that speeds up. So we can influence that. When you start to do high intensity exercise, you start to speed the anaerobic substrate so fast you build up pyruvate quicker, then you can get the oxygen into the mitochondria to meet the demand coming down. That's anaerobic exercise. So aerobic exercise by definition is you can get the oxygen into the mitochondria at the same rate you're pushing the energy down the cell through the anaerobic substrate into the mitochondria. So when you start sprinting, the anaerobic substrate has gone so fast, you're building up pyruvate so quick you can't get the oxygen in. The pyruvate's toxic to the cell, so it gets converted to lactate, and that's when you get momentary shutdown and momentary contraction. So the harder you can sprint for longer is reflective of mitochondrial health. So we practice it, we do it. Now, that's not the standard form of training, high intensity training. The standard training is your zone 2 standard training, where you're cycling the whole cell in an aerobic fashion where you're slightly out of breath. It's lower intensity, so it puts less stress in the body, so you can do it more frequently and in higher volume. And to condition the cell, so the higher I can, say, cycle my cells, basically go, the more intense I can go at a zone 2. In other words, if I was with a Tour de France cyclist, his zone 2 would be me sprinting probably on a bike, if you know what I mean. But the higher your level of zone 2 is reflective of cellular health. So we practice that as well. So I get guys who go for walks, and I say, if you don't like running and you're not used to exercise, go for a walk. I just, I'm just saying again, it's not this simple, but it's just for example, right? So the prescription from the expert physiologists, if you listen to the guys on the Peter Attia show and all these different things, they recommend around 40 minutes, 4 times a week of zone 2 training for cellular health, for the benefits of staying health. Well, that is reflective of a thing called VO2 max, which is, generally what we'd call, translate that word into your aerobic fitness. Okay. The most important thing in VO2 max, 80% of it is your cardiac output. Okay. So that's stroke rate by stroke volume. Okay. So we improve this when we do zone 2 training, 40 minutes, 4 times a week. And it protects the cells in the body. It leaves them healthy. Okay. So the best predictor of long-term predictor of outcomes, if I had one piece of information, is not blood pressure, cholesterol, or insulin resistance, or it's how fit they are. Okay, so this is the single, and this is the bit doctors can't do for you. So again, it goes back to what am I doing for guys is that I'm saying I'm encouraging them to move.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a sensible way that's prescribed such that they can optimize. Okay, so if a guy's walking, remember there's another word called hormesis, hormesis is the adaptive response of the body to a form of stress. So our bodies upregulate when we're stressed. Okay, so to a point, we can overdo it too. So I go out, I walk out the door, and I decide to go for 2 miles. Okay, my muscles have to work harder to carry my body. And as a result, they need more oxygen and nutrients. The only way is to get blood to them. That's why your heart rate goes up and it starts pushing it. So your heart's working harder, your muscles are working harder, your lungs are working harder to pull the oxygen from the atmosphere into the blood. So they're working harder. Then you stop, you have your shower, you put your clothes on, right down at a very deep level, right down to the deepest part of the cells. You're producing these things called proteins that instruct the cell to upregulate to that stress you just put it on. And then your heart gets stronger, your lungs get stronger, your muscles get stronger and more adapted to the exercise or the stress you put them under. Why? Because if it didn't happen, we wouldn't have survived as a species. That's simple. Okay. So now we have to outsource that because we did it naturally. Okay. Before, now we have to outsource it. And the prescription, as I said, for the thing. So I get guys to do that. Now, if they're going for the walk and they're not slightly out of breath, they're not working hard enough to trigger that response. I might add, a casual, gentle walk is very healthy, but it's not going to get the ultimate bang for buck in the time invested. So I get guys to wear a weighted vest, like even Met is doing it. I get a 20 kilo weighted vest, put it on, walk for 40 minutes. And I am a strong advocate for that. Now, if you were saying to me again, drawn back to medicine, if you shut down every hospital and every GP surgery in the country and got everyone in the whole country to walk 40 minutes a week, 40 minutes, 4 times a week with a weighted vest, I'm pretty sure our outcomes overall would be better. I'm almost certain. So that's, it's kind of just, it's common sense really, isn't it? When you think of it.
And what's the other aspects of the lifestyle feedback that you give them? You got the exercise, nutrition.
So the exercise, I'll just summarize that again. So, type of food, that's the most important. Volume, frequency, timing. Okay, the two most important are timing and type. Type is number one. The second is your anaerobic fitness, strength, proprioception, balance, flexibility. And they're the kind of things in
the physical components.
Yeah. Then you've got sleep. And the reason sleep is very important is because one of the main reasons is we pulse key hormones from the brain when we're asleep. So most of our pituitary and our hypothalamus is going hell for leather when we're asleep in terms of pulsing. Hormones are chemical messengers that regulate everything in the body. So, for example, they regulate your mood, your energy levels, your sex drive, your weight, and so on. So if you don't sleep, your weight goes up, your energy level goes down, your mood goes down, your anxiety goes up, your sex drive goes down. They work synergistically. So when you pull a couple of hormones out, pull them all out of whack, insulin goes up. Okay, so if I took a nurse working days and I switch them after a year to nights without changing anything else in their life, their insulin will go up 2 to 3 times. Okay, so that's not a good thing. All right, you're slowing down then the metabolization of the glucose in the anaerobic substrate. I know this is a bit technical when I don't have a diagram to show you, but this is what happens. Then what happens is that understanding that actually I'll get to the key driver of diseases. I didn't talk about this. So what's happening is that when you so the core emphasis of diseases, think of it this way, right? So I mentioned the risk factors, blood pressure, cholesterol, insulin resistance is kind of where what we look for in a clinic. Okay, that's our starting point. The precursor to that is going on decades before they tend to go up. Okay. So what drives them? So what's happening there is if you go down to the cell, okay, what happens is that when you overload cells, so processed food is high energy dense food with low nutritional value. Okay. So it's very easy to overload the cells with energy. And what that mucks up the machinery. So when you eat even semi-processed foods like bagels and things, they're very high energy dense. And when it goes into the cell, the only way to protect the cell is to cycle it faster to use up that excess energy. So if I'm trying to overload the cells of a Tour de France cyclist, I'll have trouble. They give you 2 bags of sugar a day, they'd probably be fine. Yeah. But when you overload the cell with energy and you're sedentary, this is the combination that's doing all the damage from what I can see. It damages the mitochondrial health because if you understand how the mitochondria makes the ATP, so it has a thing called, there's a process called oxidative phosphorylation. You can look this up. And within that, there's a thing called an electron transport chain. Now you're converting pyruvate, one form of energy, into ATP. Now to convert energy, you need a gradient. Okay, energy is neither created nor destroyed. That's a Newtonian physics expression, which is true. So hydroelectric power uses a gradient of gravity, and you run water down that gravity. That's kinetic energy. Okay. That kinetic energy hits a turbine and it's converted to electrical energy. We can harness that. Okay. So the principles are similar, except the methods are obviously is different within them. I'm oversimplifying again, but to get the point across. And you have this kind of barrier, for want of a better word, inside the mitochondria with what looks like a wheel. Electron microscope actually looks like a little thing that spins. It's not exactly a wheel. And it separates out on one side of the barrier negatively charged ions called electrons, and on the other side of the barrier, positively charged ions called protons. Now, negative and positive attract, so suddenly you've got a gradient across that barrier. So it pulls the electrons through, this little thing spins, and you get your ATP. Now, every so often, a little electron will decouple and spin off and do its own thing and fly around and do damage like a pinball in the mitochondria. Do you know what that's called? Free radical. Okay, you've heard of free radicals? Yeah. So the cell has its own internal detection system that detects free radicals, and it releases its own internal antioxidants to cancel that out from a part of the cell called the ribosome. Okay, and that's fine. That's a normal healthy behavior. When you overload cells and you don't use up that excess energy, like you're sedentary, you get an overwhelming amount of these free radicals that overwhelm the cell's ability to protect itself. You get a thing called oxidative stress, and that's the same as rusting. So you get internally, so the browning of a piece of iron, similar to the browning of even in the top of a coffee or anything like that. That's an accelerated aging. Okay, it's a damage thing. We call it the Maillard effect. That's the scientific term for it. So basically, that's happening inside the cells. You're accelerating the aging of the cells with this process, which is it's a slow process, but it happens because we've got a lot of cells. It just takes time for it to manifest in us physically. But that's what's happening. Now it's happening anyway, but we're accelerating it with that lifestyle. So what's happening there is the oxidative stress hits a threshold again, and because we're not pieces of iron, our immune system tries to fix this problem, and it drives these chemicals called cytokines, which are pro-inflammatory. Inflammation sits on the top of that triggered cascade that I'm talking about. You've got inflammation, blood pressure, cholesterol, insulin resistance, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, morbidity, mortality. That's your trigger. Okay, so when you look at the food, the nutrition aspect of it controls the input into the cell, the exercise controls the output in the cell, sleep regulates the hormones that have an influence on how the cell metabolizes, which if it's poor, your inflammation goes up. Stress is the fourth thing. Okay, so stress is an interesting one. So we've got 4 types of stressors, generally speaking. I summarize. This is again my interpretation, but you've got environmental stress. That'd be like heat stress, cold stress, toxic stress. So heat and cold stressors, again, are beneficial in short doses. Saunas, cold exposure. I'm a big proponent of ice baths and swimming in the sea and cold showers. It's very healthy. So, but we can see those stressors. Too much hypothermia, not great, but I'm just saying we can identify it. The second type of stress I call is physical stressors. Okay. That's more like an overtraining type stress and not enough recovery, which usually affects elite athletes, things like, but endurance athletes like, Ironman triathlete, the Tour de France cyclists in some cases, swimmers, things like this. And then, but again, you can recognize that. The last two types of stressors are the ones we have problems with in the modern world, and they're mental and emotional stress because they're perceptive stressors. So I could say one thing to one person, I could say the exact same thing to another, water off a duck's back, climbing the walls, and everything in between. So why is that? So if you were traumatized as a child, if you were abused as a child, if you were traumatized even as an adult, if you had very anxious parents growing up, and then there's just the wiring sometimes. Your coping mechanisms are not going to be the same. You're hypersensitive to information and to thinking, okay? And then it's going to trigger certain effects in the body. Now, stress does kill. And I emphasize this more so in men than in women. I know 5 people, not patients of mine, people I would have said are friends and colleagues, between the age of 49 and 55 that dropped dead. They were all pretty fit. But the one thing I knew was they were very stressed. You trigger that cascade I'm talking about with stress, and I'll tell you how. So when you get stressed, okay, so remember, the brain is wired for survival, not for truth. So I'd say something to you that is vibrations coming from my voice box that have manifested in words that you are brought up to interpret a certain way. Let's break it down. So that goes into your head and forms a thought. The thoughts, as I said to you at the start, are the most powerful things we have. So we control everything with them, we create everything with them, and we do the good or the bad with them, okay? The old Marcus Aurelius saying, show me the quality of a man's thoughts and I'll show you the quality of that, okay? So I've said something to you and it has offended you. Now, this is say that forms a thought that you've interpreted. Now, there's a couple of stages to this. You cannot stop the thought coming into your mind. So it's understanding where you can interrupt this, but you can stop embedding it emotionally. If you embed a negative thought emotionally, that has no effect in your life whatsoever. So I say something to you, it can't harm you, it can't do anything, but it disturbs you emotionally. You embed it emotionally, you trigger the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system, and you trigger a thing called the stress axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. You start dumping cortisol and adrenaline into the system, which is not benign. Now, stress won't kill you a day, a week, a month, or a year, but over years it will. It's like smoking. So if I say to you, so the point is that it's what happens is that when those hormones go up. Sorry, I'll just summarize that. So a simple words have now become a thought, has now become biochemistry, because that's how it works. Okay, now the biochemistry, the constant dumping of adrenaline and cortisol into the system interrupts other hormones. It affects insulin. It affects the metabolization in the cell. Inflammation goes up and you trigger that cascade. You need to learn to buffer your stresses. How do you do that? We can't measure it because the variables are too great. Always just remember, it has to start with thought. Has to start with thought. So I always recommend, as part of the plan, is is a form of meditation. Okay. Now this is something I'm not particularly good at doing myself, I have to admit, but I understand the benefits of it. And it's something if you could say to me to get good at one thing and I could wave a wand, it would be this, being me, okay, as a person, because I think the benefits are the most significant if you get it right. So it's a method of persevering. Obviously, it's learning a skill. It's like getting strong. It's like getting fit. But when you master it, I do to whatever that is. I think just get it to work for you. It is the single most important thing, I think. Now, the thing is that you have to sit down, and in my opinion, this is the way I would approach it, is clear your mind. Now, clearing your mind does not mean you don't have thoughts coming in. Clearing your mind means you just clear your mind and thoughts will come in. We can't control that. But as I said, we can control embedding them emotionally. So you examine. So people don't even know themselves. They don't even know what their thoughts are. So what is coming into my head? Is the majority negative? Is the majority positive? Am I thinking about one thing all the time? Am I influenced by what I experienced last week? What is actually happening in my thinking? So if you sit down and clear your mind, you'll start to understand that better. And you don't try to get emotionally attached to the thoughts. You just look at them in an innocent, childlike sense and then just let them go. So if you're standing in a train station, you're on the platform, the thought is a train coming in, you just don't get on that train. You let it go. other psychologists will say, look, clouds passing by, just let that go. But there's different ones. But the point is, it's a very important thing. So if a negative thought comes in, which you can't control, and you can bounce that, that's a very powerful thing. And it will stop that triggering that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. And just as I said to you before we started the podcast, it has a profound impact on things. People say to me, oh, I've lost my sex drive. It's because I'm stressed. And that is true, but they don't understand the mechanism. And the mechanism is a thing called the pregnenolone steal. So the ingredient for testosterone, which is very fundamental to our sex drive, is cholesterol. Cholesterol is broken down into a thing called pregnenolone, which bifurcates, as I said to you already, to the adrenals to make cortisol and to the testes to make testosterone. If you're stressed all the time, that gets shunted down towards the adrenals, and your testosterone levels will drop. That's how stress does that. Okay.
So, Emmet, the hot topic amongst men today is testosterone replacement. I hear it all the time. Some of my clients have actually gone down the route of testosterone replacement, and they say that they feel the benefits, more energy, more kind of assertiveness, sex drive's gone up. And I know that you become to the forefront of this in Ireland as a medical doctor. What's your take on it?
Interesting story. So got into it by accident. I was working when I was training as a doctor in a clinic where there was an independent GP working in this space that retired, and he asked me to take over the patients. Admittedly, I was always interested because, with sport, there's a lot of doping in sport and stuff. Not saying in rugby or anything like that, but testosterone's on your radar as you understanding as a performance agent, right? So I'm kind of thinking, that sounds interesting. Like I knew very little about it, to be quite honest. So but then I realized he went through it with me. He wasn't a very detailed guy in terms of how he managed his patients, but what he was he was quite compassionate. And the guys who were on the testosterone were doing very well, and he felt that if they stopped, they wouldn't do so. So it was a little bit of kind of, okay, well, maybe it's, yeah. So I stepped into that space and took on a relatively small group of guys and started learning about it without fundamentally, that's a lot of medicine works like that. You get thrown in the deep end and then you start adapting to it and hope that nothing goes crazy wrong in the meantime. But thankfully, thank God it didn't. But anyway, the point is, I started learning, going to conferences, I started reading about it, I started learning about it, and I started to understand the impacts on society. Now, the thing, there's two schools of thought sorry, three. Because testosterone is bad, it's dangerous, it's this. There's a middle ground to say every man over the age of 40 should be on testosterone. And then you have other guys who say, well, the middle ground is like, well, okay, if you have symptoms and you're a certain age and certain criteria and you have no risk factors for them, it's no contraindications or whatever, then, have a go, do it. So, as you get into it, you realize where really it starts to, like anything in life, you start to feel it and understand it a lot more. And then you form your own ideas and where it should fit into society, I suppose, from a medical perspective. So, safety and patient outcome always, always, always is your number one thing. Because if you take your eye off that, then, you're going to run into problems. Okay. And as well as that, that's what makes you feel better because, as you said, guys do feel a lot better when they're on it if they need it. So, it's understanding when and how to use it. So without getting too crazy on the academia, testosterone got a bad name within the medical community for two reasons based on studies that were done. One was done in 1941, by a guy called Charles Huggins, who proved that when you prostate cancer and you castrate a man, that his prostate cancer will to some degree regress. And that is true. So the hypothesis was assumed that if you had high testosterone, you would drive the agenda, and that is actually not true. So they've proven with recent studies, and these are very recent studies, they do a thing called bipolar androgen therapy, okay, BAT it's called, where they chemically castrate men with active prostate cancer, and then they wait, and then they give them high dose testosterone, and the cancer improves almost in both cases. It seems to be in the low middle ground where the cancer seems to grow, which is very, it would have been hard to figure that out. So now we know that given the testosterone, at least from the recent studies, that it's not being driven by, it's not a risk to give them testosterone. Now, when you're replacing testosterone, you're replacing it to not to supra physiological levels, which are bodybuilding levels. You're bringing it up to what will be called, normal, good, healthy levels for what would be for a healthy young man, so to speak. Okay. So So that's the prostate one. Then the heart disease one was 2 studies done in 2013 and 2014 that basically were fundamentally poorly, I'd say, poor studies done that were biased towards a causative factor in relation to heart disease from testosterone, which there was a big study done recently. The American government spent 500 million on this study called the Traverse trials, and that has subsequently put that to bed. That actually, in some cases, and a lot of cases, protective. Now, I'm talking about protective. If testosterone is too low, your risk is higher. If it's too high, your risk most probably is higher. But in the sweet spot, you're protected. Okay, so this is coming to light now. Okay, so there was I've recently finished a fellowship in this with the leading guy in the world, a guy called Abraham Morgenthaler, who's a brilliant guy over, and he's a urologist over in Boston, in Massachusetts, and he basically had the courage 40 years ago to take this on when everybody was afraid, and now he's changed it, and it's making a big difference to men's lives. So guys, typically, there's different reasons why you might have. There's a genetic component, which is kind of less. Lifestyle's a big part. If your lifestyle isn't on point, if you've metabolic disease, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, etc., your risk for having low testosterone is much greater. Okay, so we know this. So lifestyle would be very thing, and then of course, probably the most common is age. So you've got age, lifestyle in that order, and then genetics. Okay, so it'll manifest itself in certain symptoms. Okay, so the symptoms, the most common, the lead three, it would be erectile dysfunction. Actually, the number one is libido. Now, the reason I say libido is number one, libido, erectile dysfunction, and loss of early morning erections would be your three leading ones. Libido there's about three things that can affect libido that, commonly. One would be mental health, another one would be medications, and then the other one is most likely hormones. So there's not many things that can affect it. So if your libido drops off like a stone and you're not, it's very commonly, testosterone. So
And when you say mental health, are you relating to depression?
Depression, anxiety, emotional instability, okay, anything like that will definitely affect your libido. Okay, so your desire to, I'm talking about more on the extreme end of the curve, not.
Can I ask a non-medical question?
Sure.
Obviously, there's an element of not feeling good enough in every human being, but if there's a deep wound around really not feeling good enough and feeling pathetic and self-sabotage and self-loathing, does that predispose us to low testosterone?
It's a good question. I think it does, but I think it's at certain times in your life. So, for example, if you are quite a young man and you're self-loathing, that will manifest itself possibly in more acting out what testosterone would be. So in other words, you'll probably more likely be promiscuous, more likely to be reckless and self-destructive. I think as we get older, our mood and our, say, if you get negative approach to life, which is what that is essentially, like say self. The most important thing is that you love yourself, not in a narcissistic sense. Obviously, the most important thing is that and then you can spread that love essentially. The hating of yourself, the destructive thing, without question, has an effect on your hormones. I do know that much.
Yeah,
because
I believe that too.
Because you're affecting the nervous system that triggers the hypothalamic pathways. Okay, so it has to. Now, the thing is, in medicine, we have to have studies to prove everything before you can make a statement. But if you could have gone to my head and say, does self-loathing reduce testosterone? I would say absolutely.
Yeah.
That's my opinion now, but of course I do believe that because I've seen guys that are depressed and they've low testosterone. I've seen guys with emotional instability that have low testosterone. It's and as a result, then they come in with all these different symptoms. Funnily enough, it reverses when you replace it, which is really interesting. Their mood and stuff.
So go into that a little bit more. Then, if I'm coming to you and I've got low testosterone, you're my doctor. What are the benefits for me as taking it?
So when we've done all the testing, we've done the blood tests. We've no contraindications. We've looked at your symptomatic, i.e. you're feeling something. So you've either got low libido. The 6 most common things I see, because if you look at a list, there's dozens of lists falling between psychological, physical, which is muscle mass loss, recovery, stuff like this. You've got sexual function, which is the libido side of things. And then you've got cardiometabolic, which is your risk for diabetes and osteoporosis and things up when your T is low. So anyway, the point is, though, you'll have a long list of stuff that can be very discombobulating, for want of a better word. So the tree, I'll sum it up. I mean, and this is for doctors as well. I mean, if you have if you can't organically isolate the cause of these things, then do test the testosterone. So libido, erectile dysfunction, loss of early morning erections, brain fog, fatigue, anxiety. Okay, guys who get blow tea, their coping mechanisms are not there. They get grumpy and irritable, and they get anxious about things. Their confidence goes down. So you come into me, you're presenting with, usually we do a thing called an AMS questionnaire. That's an aging male symptom score, but it's it it it's not wholly, because there's other things that can cause that. We don't go by that. It just gives us a broad brush idea. Okay, when you have some of the things that are there, and most people lead with something quite significant, like quite commonly. I mentioned anxiety. Guys can't cope. I had one guy that had 10 panic attacks a day. Now he was being treated by medications from, like antidepressants and anti-anxiety tablets, etc. And it was dumbing him down. It was curbing a little bit of it, but he wasn't living his life. And I was sitting there going, oh, and this is in the early days when I didn't know as much. And I rolled the dice, and he's done super. He's off all his medications. He's got his life together. And so, no, I'm not trying to sell it, because it's unfair to sell it as a panacea for all things. It's not. But in that case, it worked. But if you had missed that, he wouldn't have done so well. That's the thing. And not to give myself credit, it was just he turned up, and that was it. So point being, so you come into me with some symptoms, generally speaking, and we'll identify low blood. We usually, so when you're measuring testosterone, you measure a few different things. You're measuring the total testosterone in the bloodstream, and there are certain things that will interrupt that, and we measure them as well. One is called sex hormone binding globulin, another one is called prolactin, but the main one is sex hormone binding globulin. Okay, that is a protein that travels through the blood that binds to testosterone and makes it inert, useless. Okay, so if you high SHBG, a sex hormone binding globulin, it's going to take away a lot of your total testosterone. So even in a lab value of height of normal total testosterone, if the SHBG is high, your overall testosterone, we call that free testosterone, could be low. Free testosterone is the active metabolite that acts on androgen receptors in the body. If that's low, that correlates very strongly with symptoms. So I'll identify your free testosterone, okay? And based on those numbers, then we make a shared decision on whether you try it, as long as one of the big things is, especially if you're younger, is conception. So if you want to have children, testosterone in and of itself, and what I mean, I'll talk about that in a sec, but if you take it in isolation, will lower your sperm count. Okay. So when you take external testosterone, it shuts down your own internal levels, and that has an impact on your sperm count. So if you want to conceive, we have to be careful. Either we don't do it, or we look at other methods, or you can combine it with a thing called human chorionic gonadotropin, which is HCG, which mimics the internal signal from the brain called luteinizing hormone that stimulates your internal levels, and then it maintains your testosterone levels, or your sperm count. So there's little things to it, but more often than not, because I see the patterns now, and I see so many people that I can identify who's genuinely got testosterone deficient symptoms. When we treat, and obviously with the blood work, and then we treat them, what the benefits are, like it's almost a night-day thing. People regain, say you've no libido, within a week, 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, I've had guys come back to me saying, my wife doesn't think I'm gay anymore. I'm really serious. Like it's profound. Like it's very quick, and that's why I think there's two main drivers behind this. And again, it's not about overprescribing, because that's not what this is about. It's about doing what's best for the general society and making sure people are well living it. Now, if I have a guy who's not exercising because he's tired, and I give him testosterone, and I give him an exercise program, and he executes that exercise program because he now has energy, is he going to be better or worse?
Well, better. It sounds like in a lot of cases it's changing lives.
Profoundly better. Exercise is in my view the single most important thing. Obviously, nutrition, sleep, and the other stuff, stress management, etc. But the point is that if he is engaging in exercise now, irrespective of a low risk, we know it's relatively low risk now based on the evidence. We have to be careful, of course. You have to measure blood thickness. Okay, there's a thing called hematocrit, which is the thickness, amount of cells per unit of blood. If it goes up very high, your risk of clot technically goes up, although I haven't seen that happen as such.
We haven't got that long left.
I'll
We're
wrap.
almost 12:30.
Yeah, but we have to do that.
Wrap it up on like a summary of, well, yeah, it is beneficial for a lot of men.
Yeah. So it is something that if you are symptomatic with anything that I mentioned, you should get your testosterone measured, and it can be, how do I say, a life-changing thing. Yeah, if you need it, and don't accept age as a reason not to be doing the things you want to do. Make sure you get these things checked. That's all I'm saying.
Wow, fascinating. Already in my head, I want to come back in the future and just ask you 10 questions about testosterone and just really zone in on that. I think it would be really well received. Because it's a big topic right now. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this pod. It's been great to reconnect with you.
Yeah, it's been great.
Before we bring it to a close, just tell us a little bit about your new venture and where people can find information about your new holistic men's clinic in Dublin.
Yeah, so well, we just launched a website, so the clinic won't be open until September. Website is called Optiman, optiman.ie, and it is the first men's health clinic to encompass all things men's health. So we've got obviously men's health, we've got specialists in men's health, we've got a urology doctor, so a specialist in urology, a consultant. We've got doctors specializing in men's health that will be general practice based. Okay, he's looking after all different areas of men's health. We've got pelvic floor physios for erectile dysfunction. We've got sexual health psychologists for psychological issues around getting erections, all this sort of thing. We've got obviously a nurse practitioner, specialist nurse practitioner. We're linked in then very with the other services like cardiology and surgeries and stuff that will be needed, say, for example, by men, so we can have a quick pathway. So it's a one-stop, I suppose, clinic for all things mental health, and it's the first one in Ireland. So we're excited. We're looking for it. Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. Well, I'd like to commend you on that because I remember 10 years ago you were thinking about that and it was a dream and now it's manifested. So well done, mate.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks.
And let's go for some dinner.
Yeah. Yeah. Still chasing that fulfillment, but we're getting, I feel like we're getting closer. Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah, we are.
Okay. Christ, thank you.
Okay, so thanks for listening to this episode of the Dare to Be Different podcast, and I'll see you on the next one.